So welcome everyone to a webinar on the future partnerships of EdTech and library media centers, specifically looking at this for independent schools. I'm Dr. Ashley Cross, the Senior Director of Education and Content here at ATLIS, and today we have a very special guest. I am so excited to introduce Bradley Lands. Now, y'all, Bradley is the Director of Technology and Innovation at the Langley School. He is going through the ATLIS Leadership Institute right now. He's also a published author, and he is just a really smart dude. So I'm very excited to have him come and share his expertise and thought leadership with all of us today. And I really appreciate him actually pivoting to join in. We actually had a different presenter on this topic that had some health issues. And so Bradley graciously stepped in and is taking over with the same presentation. So we're going to talk about best practices from multiple schools. And Bradley's got some really great ideas. So Bradley, take it away. Welcome. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name's Brad. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. My goal for this presentation is really just to get some ideas that are out there, share with you some different resources and some different spaces that I've seen recently in the past couple of years. Talk to you a little bit about some of the decisions that my school has recently made with trying to build a partnership between our library and our EdTech team. And so hopefully I'll just be able to run some ideas by you, get you thinking, get you excited about potential opportunities that you might have at your school, and then hopefully be able to connect with you at the end if you have any questions or if you have anything to share from your perspective. I am certainly not an expert in this area, but I do feel fortunate that I have been able to see quite a few different learning spaces and lots of different schools. And so I'm just excited to share what I've learned with all of you today. And so this is the future partnership of EdTech and library media centers. And just as a reminder, I'm going to be speaking at the ATLIS annual conference. It's going to be my second time speaking at the annual conference, and I'm really excited. So if any of you are going, I look forward to connecting with you there, and feel free to just connect and say hi. I'd love to meet you in person. And I'd like to get started with one of my favorite quotes about libraries. It says, "Libraries store the energy that fuels the imagination." And I love this because a true library is just about fueling innovation, fueling ideas, and then, sparking inspiration for anyone to really learn new things. And Sidney Sheldon shared this quote: "Libraries store the energy that fuels the imagination. They open up windows to the world and inspire us to explore and achieve and contribute to improving our quality of life. Libraries change lives for the better." And I think that's so true. And even more so now that we're moving into the future and thinking about how to redesign these spaces so that they accommodate to different strategies, different tools and technology resources that we are integrating into our schools today. And so that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to be discussing. And this is a great, a couple of reminders that I find to be particularly helpful. Right? School libraries are being redesigned all over the country. And I've been able to see some of these all the way from California to the Midwest to the East Coast. And they're really responding to try to meet the needs of a modern day workplace in this rapidly changing world that we're all living in today. And so we're here because EdTech leaders like you and me are trying to strategically partner with our librarian colleagues so that we can intentionally integrate technology to enhance student teaching and learning, right? And so when these partnerships develop, hopefully we will be able to learn a little bit more about each department. We'll be able to leverage some of these different technology tools and hopefully amplify student learning. And that's kind of our goal here. And I really heard this new idea called a learning commons, which I really like. We recently revised our library at my school, at the Langley School. We have a brand new building, and it's called the Crossroads Building. And it's really special because it's where our 5th grade comes together. And it's also where our primary school is housed. And it's also where we have our brand new library media center. And we have a technology innovation lab there, right? And so our school is pre-K to grade 8. And so it really is a transitional building that allows all of our different students to be able to come and explore and use that space in really creative ways. And that's kind of why it's called the Crossroads building. But I recently heard of this library media commons being thought of as a learning commons. And so I'm going to be referring to this space as a learning commons from here on out in the presentation, just because I think it really lends itself to more opportunity. And so I think I really like that, thinking about those spaces in that term. And I really like starting with the why in terms of why are we here? Why are we wanting to have this partnership between EdTech and libraries? And if you haven't heard of him before, his name's Simon Sinek, and he came out with the idea of start with why in his book. And so we really want to think about why we want to partner together to transform our current media library spaces. And we're going to decide how we're going to transform our library media spaces into what I like to call a learning commons. And then finally, in this presentation, we're going to determine what will actually go into those spaces. And so we're going to think about different ideas and different strategies that you can use to help strengthen this partnership at your school. The first thing that I think is really important when we're trying to make this type of change at our schools is we want to try to align all of our decisions with our vision, mission, and whatever strategic planning that you have at your school. These things can be core values or common language, right, which is going to be essential for any kind of a successful integration. And so when we think about programs, policies, and pedagogy, how do we want to leverage all of those three things in order to make this space or make this integration really successful, right? It's important to think about the programs that you'll be implementing in this new learning commons, and then how these programs will be integrated into the space. And then regarding policies, it can be helpful to think of what policies you need to uphold or maybe even create in order to institute this new learning commons. And then how might these policies be integrated into the space? And then finally, thinking about the pedagogy, right? What types of teaching and learning strategies will you use to be able to facilitate this learning and understanding? And then finally, how will your pedagogy be integrated into this space? And I think these are some things at the leadership level that are really helpful to consider and think about as you move forward with this integration. And the next section I'll break down into three parts, right? This part will focus on the stuff. So thinking about the technology tools, innovative furniture, and then different learning materials that might make your space unique and valuable to your school. And so we'll first start with technology tools. Technology tools might look a little bit different depending on what you already use at your current school and what your vision and mission is. But we're going to explore some devices, some different machines, and some different instruments that are pretty common in these different library media centers that I've seen. And hopefully we'll give you some ideas about what you might want to consider adding to your space. And so this was one school that I saw in Miami. This was a really awesome combination of a library and kind of makerspace. If you notice in the back, you see some libraries, you see an area where students can kind of sit and read, and it's kind of like a little mini classroom. But then it also blends naturally into this makerspace. You see different tables, you see different types of equipment, right? And it's kind of this open concept area, which really lends itself nicely to this idea that we're thinking about, right? Integrating ed tech and library spaces. And so I was blown away by what this school was able to do. And so here are a couple pictures that I found really helpful. There's another place that I recently visited in Northern Virginia, which is kind of where I live. This was the Nova Systemic Lab. And what they do is they provide a learning space for students, teachers, adults to be able to come and use, to be able to have like a true learning commons. And so they provide all these different types of tools and resources. And we actually took my fifth graders on a field trip there recently. And you can kind of see them in the background there, learning about some of the different machines that they have, such as the laser cutters, top of the line 3D printers. They have CNC mill machines, all kinds of really cool stuff that are really top of the line. Now, they're super expensive and you don't have to get the top of the line things, but it does kind of open your eyes to different possibilities and opportunities that you might have when exploring your space. And then finally, we have to have digital resources. right? At our school, we have a specific page on our website where we have all of our digital resources that students can access, whether these are applications that they're using in the classroom between different grade levels, or we actually have a designated library resource page where we have a digital library archive collection. And so students can navigate to this page and they can look at different resources, applications that we have. They have the library catalog available here. And so it's really important to be able to have a go-to space that's a digital space that will be able to coincide with the physical space that you have in these different areas of the school that you're trying to implement. The next thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is innovative furniture. Again, I've been able to see lots of different types of furniture, and it's really important to consider them being mobile, adaptive, and connected. And by connected, you can think of it as being either connected to each other by being adaptable or flexible, but you can also think about them being connected in terms of the internet or being connected to electricity so that you can have power outlets there. And so here are a couple examples that I'd like to share that I've seen recently. On the left here, you have these modular types of furniture that can really lend itself to different types of learning in the classroom. And so when you design your space, it's helpful to think about what type of furniture will be most conducive to the type of learning that's going to be in that space, right? And so elevating different types of seating is also really helpful. Sometimes you might want it low to the ground, sometimes you might want it in the middle, or sometimes you might want like a high top. Depending on the type of learning that's going to be going on in that particular part of the space can be really helpful. And so here are some different ideas in terms of low, medium, and high that you could consider when integrating into your spaces. And then thinking about the connectivity part is important too, right? They now have furniture that have power outlets built into them, which is super cool. Sometimes you might have floor outlets that you can plug directly into these couches or chairs, right? This one particularly has an outlet, and then it has 2 USB ports, which is pretty cool. And then you see you just have this little lectern style table that can be movable. It's really lightweight, and it can be easily out of the way if you don't need it, or you can just bring it up here. And so thinking about the mobility and the adaptability is going to be really important. And then I've also seen these tables where you can accommodate small groups or maybe a large group of students, right? There are these long rectangular tables, and you'll notice that they also have outlets in them as well. And so that just makes for a great opportunity to use our devices, right? And it's important to make sure that we're always connected because our battery life on our devices don't always last all day. And so it's important either to be able to charge the device that you're currently on, or being able to integrate different materials and tools that might be digital or might be electrical. And then finally, thinking about what learning materials you're going to want in your space. I think of these things as consumables, components, and other digital resources. And again, depending on your school or whatever programs you might have in place, these materials might look a little different, but it is important to consider how you want to use this space and the type of learning that's going to be going on in that particular space. And so here are some ideas. Going back to the space in Miami, the school that I saw, they did a really good job of organizing all of their materials. And so you can see these different rows and these different shelves that they have, and they're all labeled with specific learning materials and components. Some of them are consumables. They might be scrap paper, or they could be instruments or tools like scissors. And they even have gadgets, right? Things that are electrical. They have different electrical components that they use. And so being able to categorize them and being able to label them is really, really helpful for anyone that needs to use that space. And I also like that they have these really cool Lego workshop spaces. These can be used for learning in any capacity, but they've used this for specific Lego robotics. And so when they need to use the Lego robotics, they can just pull them out from the shelf, implement it right there. And then when they're finished, they can actually cover that table and they can use that space for any kind of group learning activity that they're doing. So I think it's really flexible and accommodating. And then here's another picture that I just thought was awesome. So a very different style. They're still labeled, but it's more natural just to reach in and grab. These are all kinds of consumables that you can use. A lot of these are recycled materials that you could borrow, or you could grab from a friend, or you could do a drive in order to get these different types of materials. And they're just kind of sitting out there. It's like super inviting trying to go out there and figure out, what kinds of materials you want to use for any kind of project. And so this is another style that I thought was really helpful. And then finally, you might have seen these before, but I saw the first one of these in August when I was in Miami. It's this book vending machine that I thought was super cool. It's probably pretty expensive. We don't have one at my school, but I just love the concept. It really helps us save on space. It empowers students, it gives them some agency and some responsibility and also some accountability. But they also get some choice in terms of what books they want. And I just thought this was a really neat idea that you could integrate into almost any space. It doesn't take up that much space, and you can continually update it with new books and think about, what grade levels of students are going to be learning in that space and really accommodate it to their reading styles. Okay, so we've moved on from those three categories, thinking about the different tools, the furniture, and the materials that you're going to need. Now we're going to start thinking about the intentional integration, thinking about the design and the layout of the space that you have, and then thinking about how the curriculum can naturally lend itself into that space. And so again, these are going to look very different depending on what your program looks like, depending on what your values are, what your vision and mission is. But it'll be helpful to consider these ideas if you choose to kind of revamp your space. And so I've done some research and I've collected some ideas that I think are really helpful when thinking about different spaces in your learning commons. Some of you have probably heard of a wonder wall, right? And these are some other ideas that I've implemented in the classrooms before. Things like a wonder wall, a question corner, a campfire circle, a novelty nook, a cafe counter, or maybe even a student studio. All of these require different types of furniture and seating. They also require different types of noise, right? If you think about a student studio, they're going to be in a section where noise is really going to hinder their productivity. So thinking about a quiet space, or even having like a separate room to be able to allow students to have quiet time to work on their video or their audio projects. Okay, a cafe counter can think about the elevated seating, which would kind of look like a Starbucks or a coffee shop, right? It might be a quiet area to do some independent thinking or some reflecting. A novelty nook, could where students have a section of space or a classroom where they're thinking about really creative ideas and novelty ideas. Could be really fun to be able to have a space that's designated for that. And then you have other spaces that are a little bit more collaborative, like a campfire circle. This could be an area where you're kind of lower to the ground, where students share ideas or tell stories, or really have some sort of collaborative element to it. And then you can have a question corner where students are really coming up with their own questions, coming up with ideas, and having a space assigned for that. And what's fun about this is that all of these can either be physical spaces or they can be digital spaces. Right? You can have digital spaces that allow students to do all these different things. And maybe you want to think about how you can partner the digital space with the actual physical space. How might you be able to arrange a learning space in a physical manner and then be able to provide the resources, tools, and materials that will allow students to be able to use that space intentionally. And so these are just some ideas that I've kind of come up with as I've learned from talking with different educators and looking at different schools. And here's actually a picture of our new library. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our design. Again, we don't call it a learning commons, but I like to think of it as a learning commons because there's just so many things that are going on. Right now, we've invited a guest speaker here who was an author, who was an alum of our school, the Langley School. So it kind of came back full circle. He was able to come and talk about some of the children's books that he's written, and he's done speeches on, which has been really fun. And you can see that we have the books lined up in the back. We have a really cool pull down screen when we need to use it. But if you look behind the screen, you can see that there is a glass wall there. And that's actually where our innovation lab is. And so our innovation lab is where we have our design classes for students in grades 5 to 8. And they do all kinds of fun creative work in there. And it's literally adjacent to our library space. And so this was an intentional part of our design. Again, this is our new building that is brand new this year. The first time we've done any kind of learning or teaching has been this year. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to make it the beginning of the school year because our timeline was pretty tight, but we were lucky enough to be able to utilize it right away. And so I'm going to share just a few pictures of some things that my school has decided to do. So here's a shot of our library that's a little bit further removed. We actually had a STEAM fair back in February, and we used our library as a common space where different families and community members could come and kind of flow and have conversations. And our librarians or our media specialists, they actually set up tables that were designed to have information and content on the specific strands of STEAM, right? The science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And so that was a really cool space that people were able to come in and really integrate some of those STEAM elements and that ed tech mentality. It was just a great common area as different family members and kids and teachers were actually using the classroom spaces to do a lot of the hands-on projects from our STEAM fair. And so that's just another idea of a way to integrate it. And then this is a picture of our innovation lab. And as you can see, they have very different furniture. These actually aren't movable. They are, but they don't like to be moved. They're on casters, but they're really heavy duty. And they have these wood desktop tables, right, that are meant to use for all kinds of tools and instruments. And you can see here that my students are actually in my robotics elective. And so we're using Vex robotics in this space, which is really fun. And we also have our design teacher who teaches, like I said, design in grades 5 through 8. And so this space is really transformative. We do lots of different types of projects and activities in there. And again, it's literally adjacent to our library. And we have the glass wall, which is cool because as you walk into the library, you can see students that are working on these really amazing and fun projects. And so it's a really neat space. And this was also a fun integration. At our STEAM fair, we chose to have this quiet library reading room as a place for students to build and play with Legos. And so we kind of advertised this space as come and connect with other people, right? And so it was about building those relationships, but it was also about building really fun things out of Legos. And so as you can see, we had kids of all different ages. We had kids in preschool all the way up to 8th grade that were building together. They were talking, having fun, laughing, being creative, all in the same space using Legos. And so I felt like that was a really neat way of thinking about how to utilize this reading room that most people typically use it for. And then this is a fun photo of my students that I had in my 20-time class. This was an elective, but we had this one wall that was dry erase paint. And so thinking about, again, the different materials that you want to use, paint can be one of those that can really be advantageous if you use it the right way. So we had this huge wall and the students were able to write all of their what they call bad ideas on this wall. And I learned about this bad idea factory by trying to give students confidence to put any idea out there, right? A lot of times we feel like we have to come up with a really good idea or the best idea. And so this activity was really just about getting anything that was in their head onto paper, right? Or onto any surface, whether that's digital or physical, so that students could bounce their ideas off of each other and take a step back and then think about, are there any ideas that we could turn into good ideas? Or are there already some really good ideas up there, right? So it's just kind of leveling the playing field and giving everyone kind of equal access to be able to share their ideas. And so thinking about how you can have dry erase paint on different walls could be really helpful. And then I love this space of kind of like a green screen room. You don't have to have a room or a space designated to it, right? Nowadays, all you have to do is just have some green paint or hang up like a green sheet. But if you're able to have some sort of like studio element, I think that could add a lot of value. Students these days are producing a lot of digital content, and to be able to have like a studio, I think could be really fun, and it could allow students to work in a particular space so that they can share some creative video and audio projects that they have. And this is just an example of some of our third graders that were working in this design studio that we had, where they were doing some basic editing in terms of video and audio editing. And so I think it's really valuable to integrate those types of spaces. And here's our school too. We have a totally different space that's off of our library. This is like our maker space. If you notice, there's no carpet. It's more tools centric. We have a lot of different electrical components that we use. Instead of like an idea tank, this is really where we build things. This is the space where we have a lot more hard materials, as you can tell by like some of the desks, and we have the floor. And so this is a space that I don't know if you would necessarily want to integrate off of a library, because that might be difficult to do. But think about how you might be able to integrate some of the different elements of this into a particular space when you're having those conversations. So the difference between like an innovation lab that's a little bit more idea and minds on, this is a space that's a little bit more hands-on, and thinking about how you can intentionally integrate different elements to those spaces. So kind of a quick recap. We've talked about different tools, furniture, and materials. This is a quick check-in for you to ask yourself some questions if you're really thinking about having that collaboration to do a makeover in your library media center. And so what devices will you consider for your spaces? What machines might you consider? And what instruments might you consider? Regarding furniture, think about having mobile workstations that are really flexible with adaptive seating. And then think about how you're going to be able to provide charging stations, whether that's built into the furniture, or maybe there's another solution that you need. A lot of schools have them hanging from the wall. They're built into the floor, right? Or they just install extra outlets that are around the perimeter of the room. And so keeping those things in mind can be really helpful. And then finally, the materials. What consumables will your spaces need? What type of components will they need? And then finally, don't forget to integrate the digital resources that will be able to supplement the physical space. Okay, so when you have all of these things together, it really lends itself to project-based learning. And you don't have to do project-based learning, but I feel like that's kind of why we're having these conversations. We know that STEAM and project-based learning are really powerful ways for students to learn. And when you provide them with these spaces, like I said, it naturally lends itself to this type of thinking and this type of doing. And so if you're thinking about doing project-based learning, or if you're integrating these spaces, it can be helpful to think about how your students will inquire, how they'll do research, how they'll make and share using these spaces. And you can designate different spaces in your library media center, and you can dedicate those particular types of thinking routines there. And so here are 4 things to really consider if you're going to have your students do projects a lot more. If you're going to allow different grade levels to come in and out for different parts of the process, right? Maybe they come in to start off doing research, or maybe they come in to use the materials to start building their ideas. Maybe they're building their prototypes in order to share with the rest of the class. So really thinking about how you can intentionally have these spaces for these different types of thinking is helpful. And so the first thing I like to think about is a question, right? How can you promote curiosity in these spaces? And what types of tools, materials, and furniture will you need in order to stimulate that curiosity? And the second part is thinking about research. How will your students conduct research? Will they use the library space? Will they integrate internet resources and web tools to be able to help them with their resource and their research? And then the making section, thinking about how you can consider those different tools and devices to be able to provide the best conditions that will allow students to make and build. Thinking about a safety standpoint as well, thinking about what kind of tables you want, thinking about what kind of flooring you want, and thinking about how you can make this both having students work independently and collaboratively. And then finally, thinking about how you can use a space to allow students to share and present their ideas. Right? If you remember, I shared that one picture with our pull down screen. We have 3 different areas of our new space that have pull down screens that are built in. We also have areas that have TV panels on the walls, and that can be either stationary or they can be mobile carts, right? Thinking about moving them around to different spaces. Thinking about how you'll be able to allow your students to present and share their ideas with everyone else can be really important when you're thinking about these spaces. And here are just some photos that I took my students to, again, on that field trip that I just thought were really cool. They're doing an activity here that kind of puts everything together. They're doing a project-based learning activity for a full day field trip. Usually you would break these out in different sections, and it usually takes a couple weeks or maybe even a month. But these students went through the entire design process in one full day. And this is really cool because this space is really conducive to doing that type of learning and using different technology tools and digital resources as well. And so this activity was designed for students to work in small teams and groups of partners so that they would be able to build and construct a tower or some type of structure that would be able to withstand an earthquake simulation. And so they had to do research beforehand. They had to use Vex robotics to be able to make this platform that would actually shake the structure that they made. And I'll show you here in a second. And then they had to iterate the process. They had to make improvements to their design, right? And then they had to finally share their design with the rest of the class. So it was really, really cool. Here you can see students that are kind of building that platform that will kind of shake back and forth using Vex robotics. And this activity was called the earthquake simulation. And then students actually had to learn how to code this platform so that it would move back and forth and side to side. And so there's the digital computer programming part of this project as well. And then here you can see students that are building their structure here. And I'm hoping that this video will play. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal, but this is how the platform actually worked. And so after they've coded it, they have this little hammer that keeps hitting it, right? It keeps bouncing it around to simulate that earthquake. And then the students had to physically put their structure that they created. They designed it first, right, on paper, but they had to put their structure on this platform to see if it would withstand the earthquake simulation. And just so that was just really, really powerful, how they were able to use consumables. They were able to use digital components. They did computer programming. They used different tools, right? And they went through the entire design process and finally presented their findings. And so just thinking about spaces that you'll be able to do either everything in one space or thinking about how you might want to separate those different spaces for the specific type of learning and thinking that's going to be going on. One more of the video. Okay, and then this can take a long time, right? It takes a lot of different resources, funding, approval, all kinds of things, right? So this timeline can be helpful to think about how you might be able to implement or even adapt this at your own school. Starting off with your idea is really important, right? You have to have some sort of vision of what you want your new learning space to look like and feel like. And so starting with the why that we talked about before is a great place to start. Thinking about what's the purpose, why do you want to change or modernize this workspace, and then thinking about how you can integrate your school's ideals, into this idea. And then finally get your team together, right? This is where you're going to do the partnership, the library media specialist, the ed tech team, getting different, leadership members on board, maybe having a focus group of teachers that will be able to provide insight. And finally, you're going to want your students' input, right? Arguably the most important voice. Thinking about what they want out of this particular space can be really helpful and empowering, right? Developing a plan next can be helpful. Really putting everything down, the logistics, the details, thinking about how you can, use these different steps in order to transform this space. And then finally, I suggest putting some proposal together, sharing it with your leadership team, and getting some feedback and hopefully getting their support as well. Okay, getting buy-in, like I said, is a little bit difficult sometimes, but I like to focus on what I think is best for kids, what the research says, and then how it can have positive results for our school. And so thinking about the STEAM philosophy can be really helpful. And that's kind of what we used at our school. We integrate STEAM into almost all of our classes to some degree, right? And there's so much research that's out there that benefits with the multidisciplinary approach to learning, thinking about how everything in life really comes together and we're not isolated in certain subject areas, and how we can lean or leverage on those different subject areas at different times to really work through a project. And so there's a great website and resource that I'm going to share at the end of this presentation that I've linked. But it really just talks about lots of different research and lots of different studies and tests that have been done that really advocates for the STEAM integration and project-based learning. Okay, and here's a great quote as well, just kind of advocating for STEAM integration and thinking about how students can do all these things in these spaces to think about, thematic units and being able to really become problem solvers and innovators, which lends itself beautifully to these types of innovative spaces that we're thinking about. And I'm also going to share an ISTE page that has tons of information about what librarians are doing to transform their current learning spaces. And so lean on others, look and see what other people have been doing in the past. Maybe you can get some ideas from them or even reach out to people that offer their contact information. And then finally, the funding. I think it's really important to go back to your school's vision and mission, right? Because that is really what's going to really make this a successful program, making sure that it aligns with your core values, making sure that it goes along with your program, and just kind of integrating your school's vision and mission to your proposal is going to be really, really helpful. And also thinking about integrating these things, sharing it with your school leadership team, your senior leadership team, right? All those different things can be really helpful. And then finally, I think crowdsourcing is just going to be really important. We were able to crowdsource a lot of our materials. A lot of the materials you think about are actually consumables and recycled materials. And so you could even get a drive started to be able to, collect all of these different materials, whether they're old computers, whether they're consumables like scrap paper or instruments, right? So many people have things that they'd be willing to donate. And a lot of us are lucky that we work in these schools where we might be able to collect a lot of these different resources. And so that's always an option as well. So quick recap. I know we're a little bit early, but this is just kind of a quick overview, a recap of what we've covered so far. And then I'll hopefully be able to answer some of your questions or maybe even hear some of the ideas that you've been able to implement. And so again, a quick refresher. Having your vision, mission, and strategic planning is really, really integral into having a successful learning commons space, making sure that you're considering different programs, policies, and pedagogy that your school currently implements to make sure that everything aligns really, really well. I think that's going to help set you up for success. Second is thinking about what types of learning students will be doing, thinking about project-based learning or STEAM activities, right? This approach to think about, do you want one large space that is conducive to all these different steps of the process? Or do you want to segment different spaces that really specify and really hone in on a specific type of learning and thinking that might be done in that particular area, right? It's really going to depend on the space that you have, your building, and your redesign model. But thinking about how you want to strategically have those pieces to the puzzle is going to be really helpful. So thinking about spaces that promote curiosity and inquiry and research, right? And then thinking about different tools, materials, consumables, machines, all those things that are going to be helpful when students make and build things. And then finally, thinking about spaces that will allow your students to present and share their work. And this is just a quick recap again about the things that we talked about specifically regarding tools, furniture, and materials. With tools, thinking about the devices, the machines, and the instruments that you'll have. With furniture, how might you be able to integrate mobile workstations, adaptable seating and flexible seating at different heights? And then thinking about charging stations. How are you going to be able to access the digital resources? Are they going to be around the perimeter, from the ceiling? Are they going to be built in naturally to the furniture? And then finally, the materials, right? Thinking about the consumables that you have, the components, and don't forget about those digital resources that really help supplement the learning that goes on in the physical spaces. So your big question now is, how will you integrate or form your future partnership at your school? Think about the different things that we've discussed today. Hopefully you'll be able to ask some questions in the chat, learn from other people, and hopefully you'll bring this back to your school and have your team think about some of these different elements to really transform your learning space. So with that, thank you very much.
Awesome. So thank you, Bradley. We appreciate you sharing. If you don't mind, if you will stop sharing your screen, we can, oh, wait, hang on. Sorry. I need to tell everybody about our end slide. My bad. So, Bradley is a published author. I mentioned that. He has a brand new book out. It's called Knowledge Able. So if you would like to check that out, here is that information on how you can learn more about his book. So I encourage you to visit that. Awesome. Thank you. All right, if you will stop sharing, yeah, we'll bring it up to everybody. So I think my favorite slide is where you're connecting everything to the mission and the vision and helping really get these things accomplished and getting that buy-in, right? And so it's building that team. That's amazing. But I'd love to hear from our audience. Do you have any questions or comments about the presentations? Or alternatively, are there things about your work at your school that you would like to share? So we turn it over to all of you. Feel free to come on camera and to unmute and share again, either questions or comments.
Well, I'll just share quickly. Thank you, Bradley. This was very informative. I'm Danielle from the Pingree School, and we are working on 2 redesigns of our libraries. So I appreciated the pictures that you shared of the different types of furniture and the reminder of power supplies for students. And unfortunately, my library is in a place where I can't have an adjacent makerspace, but we are looking at another location on our one campus that is 6 through 12 for that innovation lab. But the buy-in's been a little difficult, and just making sure that if you invest that money in a space, that it'll be used within the curriculum. So doing that work with the faculty and thinking about where in the curriculum, especially for upper school where it's jam-packed already, where can that have a place without a separate design class?
That's a great question. Is that you thinking out loud, or is that asking me for any advice that I might have?
You know, it's easier in the lower school and middle school for, I mean, space is always an issue to find a space for this. But at those grade levels, you know, involved in much more project-based learning, I find I was in higher ed before coming to K-12, and the upper school reminds me a lot of the issues that my faculty face in higher ed of just like, I need to get through all this content, right? So as much as we reach out and try, I oversee the library and ed tech. So reaching out with ed tech, trying to build those relationships, it is always like there's something else we need to get through in the curriculum. So I think for the high schoolers, without having a separate design class or art class or a class that integrates these things in it, it's been difficult to, and then therefore difficult to justify us spending the money on a space and taking space that's so precious on our campus. I mean, every space has got like 10 people thinking, oh, that'd be great for this, right? And I'm like one of them, oh, that'd be great for this, right? There's like 5 people behind me that want to do something else with the space. I'm just sharing. I mean, that's probably something that other colleagues here are experiencing when you don't have space to build another building or expand. I mean, all that's super expensive.
Thank you so much for sharing. You know, I can totally relate and identify to that. Years ago, when I first came to my school, I've been there for 9 years now in the same role, and so I've had some time to be able to think through our program and be able to work with some different leaders and think about how we can really integrate these new, I would say, best practice ideas for what's best for students into our current school with our vision, core values, you know, all of that. And so it's taken some time for sure to get where we are today. And so I think it's really helpful to pick out different things that your school does well and really lean on that vision and pick out some things where you feel like whatever your vision is for that space can tie in well and integrate well into your school's vision. And it's possible that your school culture might not be there right now, and that's okay. It might take some more time, and it might take some more time for them to learn and continue exploring. But I would say it's probably your biggest barrier right now, it sounds like, is not necessarily the physical space, it's getting the buy-in. And that can be really, really challenging for different schools. And so there's no, cookie cutter answer for that. I think it's just about doing more research, learning, partnering with your senior leadership team, and trying to have them go see other schools too, right? I mean, I think the people that are here already get it, right? You're already on board for the most part. And so, maybe taking some field trips to different schools that are doing some really cool things, and talk to other schools about how they're still able to, get the content and the curriculum done, while also being able to institute some of these modern day, types of learning and thinking. It is challenging for sure though, but I hear you. So thank you for sharing.
Danielle, feel free to come to MKA. One of the things that was really interesting about this in the conversation is we just redid a number of years ago our upper school library. Now it's the Academic Learning Center. And in the Academic Learning Center, I put this in the chat, we have our Idea Lab, which is a pseudo maker space. It doesn't have all the things that you would traditionally have in there, but it houses a library, it houses our archive. Our ed tech and tech department is right there.
Yeah, Bill, that's a gorgeous space. Jill has hosted us there. I'm jealous.
Yeah,
It's
and we have our learning support is there, as well as quiet study and small group workspaces. So it's been really transformational. And one of the things that I think this year we did, because we had some turnover, is our head librarian, who has always been part of every conversation in our ed tech department, is now our director of educational technology. So while there has always been a tight working relationship over a decade between ed tech and the libraries and the IT side of things, that's been now formally codified in the fact that she now has this role for both overseeing the libraries as the head librarian across 3 campuses, as well as also being the director of educational technology. So it's fabulous.
Jill and I have spoken because we have very, very similar roles in overseeing both the library and ed tech. So she's my new partner here in figuring all this out. Thank you, Bill.
And the last thing I'll say is, just hearing from both of you, just maybe do some reflecting. It's easy for us to get caught up in the stuff, right? The flashy materials, all the different machines, devices, right? It really comes down to student thinking. What skills are we helping our students learn and build so that they'll be, successful in life? And you can do that with very little if necessary, right? It doesn't have to be the biggest or the best. It's really about figuring out how you can use your spaces to be able to get your students to build on those skills, right? Those 4 C's we talk about: the creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, right? And any other workplace readiness skills that we think will be able to help them be successful. So just know that it doesn't take all the money in the world, all the biggest space. You can creatively do it within the constraints of your school if you're really dedicated to thinking about how you can get your students using those skills.
Does anyone else have any other examples of integrating this type of work across the curriculum or mobile labs, like any other creative solutions that you've seen at your school? Oh, they're so quiet on me today. All right, all right. What other questions does the audience have?
Well, I'll jump in here for just a minute. It's Linda Graham at the Bear Creek School. And one thing I was thinking of, it's really got to be driven, I think, by teachers wanting to experience project-based learning. So a few years ago, I took some teachers to PBL workshops. PBL it was just PBL. And you have to help people catch the vision, I think, for what that looks like. So that might be something. We're so fortunate here to have good support for any professional development we want to attend. So that's something, but consider taking some of the people who are already first, the first in line to want to do new things, the innovators, and then see if you can get them on board. I do have one other question for you, Bradley, and that was, did you have your students taking a field trip into the maker space to do the design work, or yeah, so you used your own school as a field trip site. That is brilliant.
I'm so sorry. That was a separate thing that we did.
Okay.
So that was one thing, to learn a little bit more about the other spaces and get some inspirational ideas. We do currently have a makerspace and we have an innovation lab, but sometimes it's good for students to just get out of their normal routine, right, and be able to leverage some things that are in the community. And so we just took a little field trip to get them out of their comfort zone and use some tools and materials that were already provided to them, and just kind of like package workshop. So it was both. We have some of that stuff at my own school, but then we also did take a field trip outside of our school to a different site.
Okay, cool. That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Can you tell us about what are you doing at your school? How is the relationship between ed tech and the library? What does that look like?
I can jump in. So ed tech and library are all under the same umbrella that I supervise. And the librarian that we have is great, runs a more traditional program. So we have an innovation space that's like separate, it's down the hall. And so it's been kind of separate, even though we're a team together. So I'm kind of at the beginning, like working on that buy-in, because, you know, until we can like build the need with what we have, we can't really move on to, you know, really transforming the space. And I think that's where I'm having trouble, is because I think like our media specialist would be open to it, but they are focusing on the stuff first, where, you know, our philosophy is, you know, creating a need with what we have, which is, you know, how we ended up with an innovation space over several years of developing kind of that maker mindset. So it's trying to build that buy-in with someone that feels like they need the stuff first, but making them feel comfortable and confident without the stuff in order to get the stuff.
Yeah, and I know sometimes it's difficult because a lot of leadership members, and rightfully so, you know, they're hesitant. They don't want to spend all this money and do all this transformation because they're afraid that no one's going to use it, right? And so that's why I think it's really important to have that culture already established, thinking about what programs you currently have that you'll be able to integrate. It's tough to put the cart before the horse in this part, right? Because that's what a lot of leaders are looking for. They want to be able to see and know that their current program is going to flourish by making these different changes. And so sometimes it can be helpful to just reground and, you know, really try to think about how you can improve your current program, you know, before having some of these serious conversations about spending all this money and doing this complete reform. So sometimes I've learned that too. That's what my leaders told me as well. And so I know that from experience. It was, how are you going to ensure that people are going to use the space, and how are you going to ensure that, you know, it'll be efficient and a good reason to spend the money. So
yeah, because like, how do we transform it to a learning commons, you know, when we have an innovation space that's down the hall? So like, what's the differentiator? Because we do want to improve it. So fortunately, we're in a situation where we are running out of space, so it's an opportunity to explore the media center and see how can we transform it. So that's my path.
thank you for sharing, Emily.
Well, I'd kind of like to jump in for just a second. I am in a new role at a new school, so just recently started. I've shared this with a few of the other folks that are here on the call today. But first of all, Bradley, thank you very much. Some great information. I am building what we're calling a Department of Modern Learning, which is exactly what we've talked about. It's the collaboration sort of piece between traditional tech, tech integration, our library media, as well as a curriculum and maker as well. And so it's really the idea of creating a teacher-facing collaboration and consulting organization within the school. And so I hadn't really thought about space from that perspective. You know, how might we build something to help facilitate that sort of model that we're trying to build here. I've been thinking about, well, how can we redo some of the spaces that we have? But it's kind of, we're fortunately on a fairly large campus, so we've got some space to grow, but obviously that's all expensive. But anyway, I just really appreciate that you've given me a lot of things to think about. I would add also, you mentioned the 4 C's, but you also talked about in your presentation the concept of curiosity. That is a 5th C in my book. I kind of talk about the 5 C's. So thanks.
Thank you, Daryl. Would you mind sharing what your concept was again? It was modern workplace something. What was it called?
Yeah, it's the Department of Modern Learning. So yeah. And again, it's the idea that it's a collaboration or between all these various teacher-facing groups on campus. So we kind of serve the whole community, all the various divisions and whatnot. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Daryl, how far along are you in that process of developing that department?
Well, I've just literally got to Fort Worth Christian where I am today. My previous school, Good Shepherd Episcopal in Dallas, I was beginning to build this concept there, and I officially kind of changed my title, changed the name of the technology department to the Department of Modern Learning. And we had a bit of a jump start there in that our makerspace, which over there we called SPARK, which was an acronym for solving problems and asking real world questions. But that was actually in our library space. The school had taken sort of half of that space and converted that, a lot like some of the pictures that Bradley had shared. But yeah, so I've got a couple of years in at my previous school. Fort Worth Christian reached out and said, hey, we'd love to really do that, but here's your opportunity to build it from the ground up. So I'm literally just getting rolling.
Well, congrats on the new role, and definitely stay in touch. I mean, that could be a very exciting conference presentation or webinar. I know our community, I mean, the response even in the chat, you know, people are definitely interested in learning about that. And I think you're onto a really innovative concept. I mean, that it's kind of the root of why we came to this webinar today, was to have these forward-thinking conversations about what are some innovative ways that we can collaborate in schools that maybe we haven't done in the past. So we'd love to stay in touch and hear more about that. Yo, we're at the top of the hour. Before we leave, Kelsey again had dropped that final reminder in the chat. Definitely join us in Grand Rapids. We'd love to see you there. Kelsey, you can go ahead and stop the recording.